Well, hello, hello. Here we go. We're looking at post-impressionism today. The most famous artist, maybe, well, besides the Italian Renaissance artists. We're going to talk about Van Gogh today, so that's a lot of fun. Okay, so it was in the 1930s that Van Gogh achieved the status of archetype. Or archetype, I think in this context means, the most well-known, probably, or that's fine. Okay, a figure no artist or connoisseur could ignore. That it was in just these years, it, in fact, rather remarkable. At the most important movements of the period had little to do with his art. As the most important movements of the period had little to do with his art. Cubism, Surrealism, and New Objectivity, which is basically German Expressionism, were in no way stylistically indebted to Vincent van Gogh. The latter's great friend and adversary, Gauguin, was undoubtedly closer to the Surrealists. Cézanne is often considered the father of Cubism, while artists of the New Objectivity and Magic Realism mainly follow the example of the old masters. Now we're going to go through some hallmarks of Van Gogh's art, or the main things of his art. And we're going to bring in other artists. We'll talk about who he was influenced by and then who he influenced. So it's kind of fun. Van Gogh in this context is sort of the fulcrum of this first part of this lecture. So one thing I want to say from the outset that I think is super important is that we cannot underestimate how much Van Gogh's sister-in-law really is responsible for making Van Gogh famous. After Van Gogh died, and after, I think it was even after her Theo Van Gogh died, her husband. Don't quote me on that, but anyways, the most important thing is that she realized his genius and basically shared it with the world. So thank you very much, Mrs. Van Gogh. Okay, so we're going to start with the gestural brushstroke. And I could imagine that I could show you almost any painting by Van Gogh. Shoes, dental floss, I don't know what else, and you could probably recognize it as his work because his brushstroke is definitely identifiable, and so that's what we have here. Okay, and we think that originated from artists like Frans Hals. Frans Hals was a 17th century artist and Dutch 17th century artist, and so it would make sense that Van Gogh, who is also Dutch, would be influenced by artists of the past. And so here we have Frans Hals' two portraits of lower-class women, which is also something that Van Gogh obviously was known for as well. So, here we've got some... Now, was the Rijksmuseum the most famous museum in Amsterdam and the Netherlands? Was there such a thing during Van Gogh's time? Yeah, I think he would have been able to go into the Rijksmuseum and see works like this. Okay, and then what about... Here's another hallmark of Van Gogh, or characteristic. Color as invested with differing emotions. Hold it on a second. I screwed up. We're still back at gestural brushstroke. Sorry about that. Okay. Well, I'm not going to correct it. You guys are fine. You guys know I meander at times. Okay, so Delacroix, you should know about him by now. I think we looked at his work. Yes, okay. So remember, Delacroix was an Orientalist, went to an Islamic land, came back and painted it for white consumption, and it was, very exotic and erotic, although I don't think these two paintings are necessarily erotic. And so you're seeing that swirling sort of energy to Delacroix, and that would have definitely influenced Van Gogh. Okay, let me make a little advertisement for art history classes. There is probably nobody in the history of art that loved art history and other artists' work more than Van Gogh. So take that to heart. He actually worked as an art dealer for his uncle for a little while. He also tried to be a minister for a little while, which we'll talk about soon. So if you want to be as good as Van Gogh, take art history classes. Just kidding, you don't have to, but it's good. It's a little advice. Okay, so then who did he influence? He definitely influenced Willem de Kooning, who is also Dutch. He was a stowaway on a ship in the 1940s or 50s. I'm going to say 1940s. He made it over to America, and he is what we call an abstract expressionist, who we'll see at some point in this class. And what he's known for are his paintings of women. And it's always so interesting. There's a couple of artists who have really sort of broken out recently, and their brushstrokes very much remind me of de Kooning. But anyway, so de Kooning is influenced by Van Gogh, and then de Kooning influences other people in the 2000s, 2020 is, or the aughts, I guess we could just say. So very industrial brushstrokes, and he was trying to say, he was working against the idea of these beautiful, attractive nudes in art history. That was the opposite of his undertaking with his paintings of women. Okay, now we can move to color is invested with differing emotions. I think this is a really easy one to understand, because I would imagine you yourself use color as a way to express your emotions. And when I'm on admission panels, sometimes prospective students will say that. They'll say, within my aesthetic, I use color for certain types of moods. So Van Gogh would have been influenced by George Seurat, the very famous pointillist. So pointillism is when Seurat basically puts little dots of paint, and they're layered dots. It's just not one dot of yellow, and then he goes on. He'll start with maybe, yellow, and then put red on top of it, and then blue on top of it. As you might imagine, he wasn't very prolific. We'll talk about him in another lecture because his method was so work-intensive. But Seurat is, again, what we would call a post-impressionist. And do we look at him later? Yes, of course we do. And then on the right is I think it's graphite. And it's probably in preparation for his most famous painting, which we'll see today, which is Sunday afternoon on the island La Grande. Okay, so here we go. So the person that probably painted the most self-portraits is, of course, Rembrandt, another Dutch artist. The Dutch are dominating here. And I think Van Gogh would come out as a close second, maybe not close second, but a second. And he loved to paint himself, and you can really get a sense of his moods from his color, absolutely. Two differing types of moods. A little bit, I think there's a little bit difference between these two. All right, that's that. Okay, and then who would he have influenced with regards to color? And that would be Jasper Johns. As of this recording, Jasper Johns is still alive, which I find absolutely amazing. And so Jasper Johns, I like to call him pre-pop. He's not really abstract expressionism. He's really not pop. And he and Robert Rauschenberg, I think, are somewhere in the middle. I say pre-pop. And here he's using colors. It would be interesting to know why he used particular colors for particular states. My state in the middle, Nebraska, is sort of yellow-red, which I think is perfect, especially for the yellow for corn. But yeah, so Jasper Johns really sort of breaks out in the latter half of the 1950s and then all the way through the 1960s. And there's still exhibitions of his work all the time. Okay, so let's go to the next one, nature. Oh, that's a big one with Van Gogh. That's a big one. While Impressionists deliberately opted for motifs from the modern urban world, in part in order to demonstrate their own modernity, Vincent van Gogh was drawn to nature, not so much the wild landscape as areas cultivated by man, which, when I read that a number of years ago, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So he seldom paints just unbridled nature, untouched by man, woman. It's always going to be some fields, which I appreciate from given where the state I'm from. And so this is Wheat Field with Crows, his last painting. And he was influenced by Courbet. Now, we've talked about Courbet. He's a realist. On the left, I believe, is the painting at Mia, which, let's just be honest, it's not the most exciting painting in the world. I mean, maybe you're into it. Sorry if you are. And then on the right, a landscape near Ornans. So we're going to see more and more of this, and I talked about this in the realism lecture. We're going to see more and more of this, that Van Gogh's really go-to past art movement was realism, for sure, and especially the influence of Millet. Okay, so your heart goes out to Van Gogh, doesn't it? There's a composer at Lincoln Center who's a saxophonist, and he made an album. All of his saxophone songs were connected to different artists, and he did one for Van Gogh. And the song itself, he meant to sort of give comfort to Van Gogh with the way that he composed the piece. I thought that was really interesting. So Van Gogh tried a number of different careers, and this is in his career where he's among coal miners, I think in Normandy, and this is the very famous painting, of course, The Potato Eaters. And it didn't work out to be a minister, which is to our benefit, let's just be honest, because he became then a painter, an artist. And then on the right is straight up Portrait of a Peasant. And he just had such empathy for people, I think partly because he was such a tortured soul. And, he's not interested in painting the aristocracy. He's interested in painting people that he knows, or becomes well-known, or people that he, through his travels in life, the people he gets to know. Okay, now let's move to... who influenced him with regards to... shoot. We're on the second one now. The fourth one. Vision of Mankind, the Dignity of Men and Women on Canvas. So that was The Potato Eaters and Portrait of a Peasant. And I love that statement. Vision of Mankind, the Dignity of Men and Women on Canvas. So who is he influenced by? He's influenced by Velázquez, who seems to be popping up a lot in these lectures. So it's The Toppers, a very, very famous work by Velázquez, which is actually in Manet's portrait of Zola, which is interesting. And then you have this. Here is proof positive. We've seen another connection between Millet and our discussion of realism, but on the left... you have the work by Millet. Let's see. First Step. Oh, that's sentimental. And then on the right, you got Van Gogh appropriating the work. Now, let's talk about appropriation. I'm a fan. Now, these days, of course, you need permission from the artist, right? I mean, straight up, we know that's important, and we need to protect people's creative output, so on and so forth. But I think this is kind of a process for Van Gogh, that he's learning how to become an artist through looking at works of the past. And so, we could have an argument about it in class, but I don't have any problem with him basically appropriating this image. Okay, talk about gory. This is two old ones eating soup. And this is by Goya, somebody we've talked about. And again, it's showing an interest in the underclass, which is all of what Van Gogh's about. Okay, who did he influence? Well, Diane Arbus for sure. Arbus is a fascinating figure in the history of photography. She worked for her husband as an assistant to his advertising work, and then she went outside and she photographed people on the streets, and that's what you see here. I particularly like the one on the left. I don't know why. Maybe because I like street hot dogs. She's controversial. There's definitely power dynamics going on with her photographs of people that work for the circus. Let's just say nobody can do what she did back then because people are aware of that you shouldn't just go out and photograph. Maybe a good example: don't go out and photograph a homeless person. That's a power dynamic that's not fair. So just know that she's a very controversial photographer, not heavily, but influenced by Van Gogh's focus on the poor. Okay, now we're going to go through a series of just works by Van Gogh. We're done with that segment where we're talking about who was he influenced by and then who did he influence. So we're starting off with this one, Dutch Winter. I have been thinking back to my winters as a little boy, and how harsh they were at times. I'm sure you've heard people say, maybe your grandparents, that winters in Minnesota used to be there used to be much more snow and below temperatures, and so the Netherlands experienced that. I really like this one. It's a head of a peasant woman with white cap on the left, and then peasant woman digging. And he did charcoal, obviously oil paintings. I'm trying to think if he did any other mediums. I'm not really familiar with any watercolors. I'll have to look that up. But the one on the right, I really like. I wonder what she's digging for. What do you wonder? Okay, and then here is a self-portrait on the left, and then the portrait of his mother. I think a lot of artists are very close to their mothers. You can get into these discussions of, what's feminine, what's masculine, and that has obviously changed quite a bit in my lifetime. For the good, the better. It would be interesting to do a statistics study of, let's say, 100 artists of the 20th century, and maybe through their memoirs, or more likely through their letters or journals, try and figure out how many of them were closest to their mother as opposed to their father. That would be an interesting study for sure. Okay, so when I was teaching in D.C., I had a student whose dad was a photographer for National Geographic magazine. Wild. He took the route of Van Gogh from the Netherlands. No, I think probably from Paris down to southern France, and he took photographs of his travels. And this is Van Gogh on the move. This is fishing boats. And then you may know or may not know that he was trying to set up an art colony in Arles. And he invited Paul Gauguin to come down and be a part of that art commune. It didn't work out very well. One of the things that was different about them is that Van Gogh was fine with painting inside the house, whereas as opposed to Gauguin, who would paint, plein air out in nature. But then again, Van Gogh also painted out in nature. So it didn't work very well. And then here are two paintings, very, very similar. So I want you to take a moment and try and figure out what's different between the two. Now, I went to a Science Friday with Avery many years ago, and there was 2 or 3 employees of the Chicago Art Institute who created this device, a handheld device, in which you could put the device up to the painting, and then inside a screen, you could see what the original colors really looked like when it was fresh off the easel. It was really interesting. So the colors are a little bit different on the floor, and then the biggest difference would be the different paintings that are above his bed. And so this also reinforces that he had copies, reproductions of very famous works, and kept them with him when he was traveling and living. Starry Night. Why is it so popular or well known? Well, first of all, it's in the best museum of modern art in the world, which is the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan. Also, I think people just find it so interesting that the sky is swirling. What else? Oh, so I had a student do his final project for me, and there is this guy who was holding Van Gogh's Starry Night, and he was breaking up with his girlfriend. No, she was breaking up with him. And he finally gets that she wants to break up, and he goes outside, and it's winter in Minnesota, and he looks up through this street light, and the snow is swirling, much like in the painting, the poster he's holding after being crushed. I always loved that project. Matt Thiessen was his name. This is probably like in 2001. Okay, and then on the left is Van Gogh after he cut off his ear. But in the background, you can see a Japanese woodblock print. And Van Gogh was very influenced by Japanese aesthetics. If we have time, I'm going to try and show the video on that topic soon. Okay. And then this is a little take by Robert Colescott, who was an African-American artist. It's sort of his take on, I think, not necessarily worshiping Van Gogh, that he's, I don't know, it looks kind of like a satirical approach, perhaps, to everyone's undying love of Van Gogh. Okay, now we're going to talk about Gauguin. So he starts painting this religious sect in France, sort of kind of like the Amish. And this is his vision after the sermon. And you can really see the influence of Japanese woodblock prints with that branch sort of coming over the overall red. And yeah, this is one of his most famous works for sure. And here again, he's in this sort of world of this group of very religious people. And then Gauguin goes to Tahiti. He abandons his family. But before that, he does the Yellow Christ. And we're really in the thick of art movements that have stopped painting Jesus and history paintings. Although you're going to see that a little bit with German Expressionism. But yeah, the Yellow Christ, it's sort of the last gasp of, well, at least in the late 19th century, kind of the last gasp of interest in religious art. And then on the right, when he gets to Tahiti, he makes this. It's called Hail Mary. You didn't know it, but actually Jesus was not born in the Middle East. He was born in Tahiti, and his mom was Tahitian. Gosh, I don't want to go too much into this, but there's been a lot of criticism of Gauguin, and I have been myself very much embraced that criticism. There's some new scholarship going on that maybe he wasn't as bad as we thought. I'm just going to hold judgment on that new scholarship. I haven't read it, but yeah, so I think the main criticism is that he was promiscuous in Tahiti, and I'll just leave it at that. Maybe I'll make this lecture, maybe I'll redo this lecture believing that I shouldn't criticize him, but for now I'm still criticizing him. And then on the left, and this is the kind of stuff I'm like, come on. It's called What Are You Jealous of the Nude Tahitian Women on the left. And then The Brooding Woman. I like that one because, yeah, I don't have a very positive perspective on Gauguin. And maybe I'm a Philistine, you know. Maybe I just don't understand it. Smarter people understand it better than I do. Who knows? And then this one is Spirit of the Dead Watching. And then this is the final one, Whence Come We, What Are We, Whither Go We? You gotta give him credit for his titles. He tries to make them sound incredibly intellectual. All right, now let's go to Rousseau. There's a major show out east on Rousseau. I don't know if I'm going to get the catalog, but Rousseau is definitely what we would call an amateur artist. He was not formally trained in art. I can't remember. He worked as some sort of government functionary. And so what you're appreciating in Rousseau's work is that it's raw. It's uninfluenced, unlike Van Gogh. It's uninfluenced by art history. It's not influenced by any teacher because he didn't have a teacher. And he's what we would call a outsider artist in a way. And that an outsider artist, just to succinctly say, it's somebody that's not formally trained. So there's this ridiculous painting on the right of a nude woman and a bear. It looks like a bad, community theater bear outfit. And then there's a hunter on the left, and it's self-portrait painting on the left. This one is something else. So I think he was seriously trying to get people to be critical of war. So the woman, it looks like she's been Velcroed onto the giraffe horse. And then there's the bodies down below. And this is supposed to, again, make you believe that war is horrible. But, you know, the sort of Elvira wig hair and the black cotton candy thing she's holding, and then the sword, there's a ridiculousness to it, unfortunately, or fortunately. This is probably one of the most famous ones in the United States. It's at MoMA. This is The Dream. Okay. This is another famous one, Exotic Landscape. I sometimes wonder if Rousseau was naive, maybe boyish, because you have this nude woman on the couch in this jungle. It's I don't know. I think it would be interesting to know his mindset. Maybe if I was going to get that catalog, I could figure it out for the exhibition. And then what else? Struggles between tiger and buffalo. All right, I promised you, and I am following through. We're going to look at some works by Seurat. We got one more Rousseau. This is my favorite Rousseau. I like the oranges. I like the monkeys. Now, here's something I should mention. He never really traveled or lived in a jungle. He went to the Arboretum in Paris, and that's where he got his sense of nature, which, it's kind of interesting. Okay, let's go with Seurat, one of the most beloved painters of all time, no doubt about it. And much like the Impressionists, he's interested in modernity. This new thing called the weekend, where you have not just Sunday off, but you also have Saturday off. And so this is the Bathers. Soaking up some leisure time. Okay, the most famous painting by any of these artists in the United States? Yeah, I think so. So this is Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte, and a couple of things are happening. We think it's going through the ages of women. So you have a baby right here. I don't know if you guys can see the pointer. Then you have a little girl to the right in red. And then you have actually the mother and a little girl in the middle. And then it kind of just goes through a scale, everybody getting older and older and older, until you get to this woman who's got the chained monkey. And then finally you have this nurse in this white and red cap who's looking over this older woman with the umbrella, which is really... I just love that idea that he is going through the ages of women. Some of you might have seen the very famous musical Sunday in the Park with George by Sondheim. I've seen it. Warning, it's a very long musical. But in the first act, a number of the main characters in the musical come together to form the painting, which is pretty cool. All right. And then here's two studies. Once in a while in these lectures, we see studies for paintings. And because he was not very prolific, he just didn't do that many paintings because of his method was so work-intensive. So anytime you can get a painting by Seurat, especially something as a study, it's pretty great in your museum. Okay, this one's at the Barnes Collection in Philadelphia, and it is a very large painting. I've seen it before, and it's a painting within a painting, so you've got Sunday afternoon inside, and then you've got these models for Seurat, and so I think it's interesting that the painting itself is in Chicago, and then this one is in Philadelphia. America should be proud that they have two of the largest paintings by Seurat in the United States. I've always liked this one on the left. It's where are we at? Okay, the parade, and then it's another circus painting on the right, not by Seurat. It's by Georges Defeuer. Sorry, French speakers, for probably butchering that name. There was a show, and I can't remember where it was, and I got postcards from it, a show on just works of art that are about circuses. Okay, now let's look at some portraits. Now, Seurat, a lot of people don't know this. Seurat was not the only pointillist, okay? So there was others, and this is Paul Signac's portrait of Felix Fignon, which is a very beloved painting, that's for sure. And then, what do we got on the right? Oh, George Seurat's actual charcoal sketch of Paul Signac. I love the contrast between these two works. That's nice. Okay, and then you've got who? I'm losing my slide list. You also have another one. This is Portrait of Madame Astrie. I kind of like that one a lot. I like the palette. I like her pose. Yeah, it's pretty good. The one on the right is probably a little bit more of a famous pointillist besides Seurat sort of painting. Yeah, so it's, let's see, Three Children in Blue. Now, there was a major show of post-impressionists, particularly pointillists, at the Met just recently. I might have to, well, I probably won't get the catalog, but I'll probably use it in an EMAC at some point. Anyways, so that's been sort of a thing in art history as of late, to see this stuff. And then we're going to end with Cezanne. So just right off the bat, let's say that Cezanne is known as a painter's painter. In other words, it would be interesting to know if Catherine loves Cezanne. Painters for some reason just really are drawn to him. And I don't really necessarily understand it, but I do know about it at least. And so there's a self-portrait with olive wallpaper on the left. And then the thing that Cezanne is mostly known for are his paintings of apples. It's just, that's, average person on the street, if they knew about him, probably would know that. Now, he's not interested in painting reality to the T. He messes with the folds and the shapes of the apples. He's a modernist. All of these artists are modernists. They're not trying to fool your eye by not showing you paint strokes, so on and so forth. And then the other thing that he loved to paint was Mount Saint Victory, and he did a lot of paintings of it. And at the bottom right, you can see the beginnings of the influence of Cezanne on Picasso and Braque with Cubism. And in fact, it's Braque's cubistic painting, The Castle, on the right. So it's interesting. You can kind of go through the progression, starting in the left-hand corner, middle corner. You could see maybe how that would influence the cubists. And there it is at the bottom. Okay, we did it. That's post-impressionism.